When you think of Airbnb, you think of a home away from home, a place where you can belong anywhere. Now it is one of the most successful startups in the world, being valued at over $90 billion and making billions of dollars in revenue and having expanded to over 200 countries and territories. But that is not how it started. In 2008, three friends Brian Chesky, Joe Gebbia, and Nathan Blazek were struggling to pay rent when they realized there was a fully sold out conference in San Francisco. They saw an opportunity to sublease their apartment by letting people sleep on some air mattresses. Their success was a slow burn, but they got their big break after hosting stays during Obama's run for the presidency. Although their weekly revenue was only $200 a week, and they were on the brink of collapse. They headed back home to San Francisco, the home of Silicon Valley, in 2009, where they had a chance meeting with Paul Graham, the founder of the seed incubator Y Combinator, where they would get their first investment of $20,000. Before we talk about what happened there, let's talk about the entrepreneurial ecosystem and location advantages of Silicon Valley. Today, Silicon Valley has the best related and supporting industries in the world to be able to build an entrepreneurial ecosystem. When we look at a map, it really puts it into context how dense this area is with top talent, capital, and infrastructure. Here are Berkeley and Stanford, two of the top 10 universities in the world, positioned on opposite sides of the city, giving full coverage for both students and industries to cross paths, gaining exposure and inspiration from each other. Once those future entrepreneurs graduate, they can start working for Google, Facebook, Uber, Tesla, and of course Airbnb. Once those people graduate or finish working for those companies, they'll need funding for their new venture. For Stanford students, this will be easy since they can just walk 5 minutes to Sand Hill Road, Silicon Valley's version of Wall Street. Here you can find A16Z, Sequoia, and Coastal Ventures. These are some of the most titanic and richest firms in the world, but that might not be what you need for your first venture after graduating. That's why there's also plenty of angel investors and seed funds willing to invest smaller amounts and take bigger risks. This creates one of the best funnels in the world to churn out many million, billion, and trillion-dollar companies. The mantra of Silicon Valley investors is to be a born global business and grow at all cost, and that brings us to 2011. They had raised almost $120 million in investments and had about 100 employees, some of which were in Germany after acquiring Accolio, the German competitor to Airbnb. This would be the start of their path to internationalization. After acquiring Accolio, they no longer suffered from psychic distancing of expanding to Germany, a country with different culture, language, time zone, and political systems. The main differentiator between Airbnb and hotels is the trust and integration with the local culture. Since they established their first international office, they were able to learn from their local employees on how Germans lived, what the best places to go are, and let their guests and hosts feel proud of their local environment and culture. It is important to note Airbnb's entry mode for all of their international markets. Asolio had a strong presence in Germany and were able to grow locally using Airbnb's early business model. There were definitely some reasons for going into a joint venture with them instead of making them a fully owned subsidiary. A joint venture is when two companies work together to achieve a common business objective. In this case, it was to house people going on holiday. This gives them easy access to the German market at lower costs with less risk to the Airbnb brand, especially when it comes to legal and societal issues, which we'll come to later. Instead, Airbnb chose to make Accolio a wholly owned subsidiary. This diverts some of the drawbacks of going into a joint venture. Doing so gave Airbnb full control over the operations, which made it a lot easier to coordinate between their head office and Germany. But one of their biggest benefits were the expansion of their brand to the global market and be able to fully integrate their learnings from Germany to expand even further, which they did. When looking at expanding even further overseas, Airbnb has a few advantages. They are inherently a born global company. The business culture of Silicon Valley, which is built upon innovation and data acquisition, which is used for their innovations. With this in mind, Airbnb chose to use some of the principles in the Uppsala model. When they expanded, they did it one step at a time by expanding to countries with similar geographic or psychic distances to their home country. In the same year as expanding to Germany, they went to the UK and then France in 2012. which would lead to their expansion into the rest of Europe, then Asia, Latin America, and finally to Africa and the Middle East, giving them presence on every continent, even Antarctica. During this expansion, they found their technique for expanding to Germany worked quite well. Airbnb used their brand and made wholly owned subsidiaries in each major country and region they expanded to. Even though this had the drawback of being high risk and expensive, this was not a concern for them. During the period of 2011 to 2016, they had acquired more than 10 companies, raised more than $3 billion in capital, and grown their employee count from almost 100 to over 3,000 people all over the world. This is when they truly built their portfolio of resources, capabilities, and strategies, which evolved with every single expansion they had, making each one more efficient, high quality, and more profitable. By the end of 2016, Airbnb was valued at $31 billion and was a Silicon Valley darling. While their growth was welcomed by travelers and homeowners, they faced two major setbacks, that being from some of the local communities and later COVID-19. Silicon Valley's mantra of move fast and break things may work and be appreciated when you're making engaging social networks or search engines, but it's easy to see where things may go wrong with people's way of living and the people governing the people affected by those changes in living. Some of the biggest ways Airbnb's expansion hit locals were in the forms of living costs and gentrification. A study was done in 2020 about the effects of Airbnb on Barcelona, one of their most visited cities. Here they looked at the difference between areas with high density of Airbnb rentals and local residential rentals between 2012 and 2016. They found that in 2012, the monthly rent would typically be around €2,269 per month, while only being $2,356 per month in an area with higher density of Airbnbs, only about a 4% price premium. By 2016, typical rents had increased by 15%, while rents in areas with more Airbnbs had risen by 28%. This meant that if you were living in these areas, your rent could have increased up to 26% in the span of 4 years, while your income had likely only increased 8%. This caused outcries from locals and politicians alike. In many cities, this took form of specific licensing for short-term rentals, strict zoning regulations, Airbnb levies, a €600,000 fine, and a cap on the amount of days a property could be rented out for short-term rentals. Similar actions would be taken in other cities such as France, Amsterdam, Sydney, Tokyo, and even the home of their first expansion, Berlin. While these would pose a setback for the business, they were still able to earn significant income from every continent in the world and have a strong global presence. But that would all change in 2020 when COVID went global. While the earnings of the top companies on the Nasdaq during COVID had some of their largest revenue increases, on an average of 32%, Airbnb, which relies on global travel, was stumped when borders were closed and showed in their IPO filings that revenue had fallen by roughly 30%. This event changed Airbnb's future perhaps more than any other major company. At the start of COVID, they laid off 1,900 employees, roughly 25% of their workforce, and changed their business model to focus on locals instead of travelers. This took the form of expanding their selection to more remote locations and long-term rentals. They found this transition worked amazingly well. This was the time of work from home and the Great Migration, where people moved from cities to more regional locations. In the case of Victoria, Australia, which had some of the strictest COVID policies in the world, a study from Melbourne University found that in some areas there was up to an 11% exodus from the inner suburbs to rural suburbs or cities. This made the map of people leaving Melbourne look like this, and the people joining rural communities looking like this. An exodus out of the city was perfect for Airbnb's new business model, to the point where they kept it, even once COVID became a thing of the past, and it is now one of their main products. This brings us to the current day and what the future may hold for Airbnb for their efforts to further internationalize. As we mentioned, Airbnb has already expanded to every continent and almost every country. Their further expansion plans include fostering the digital nomad trend, while expanding to emerging markets by utilizing these two trends along with AI. Airbnb is aiming to make your home away from home anywhere in the world and allow you to belong anywhere, and it seems like they might be on the right track.